Oh, samba change show the tutti December shows start the call the social race, no? That you may be going to set that in the dark job and Sasa. She is so well. Current chicken sent that in Cheba Senden de Lovanam di Gilangs, a muscle, she to go by she no way. She needs Zimba. Charis Bacachete, Lama Yabu in second Cheva Yabu is against Olayan, didn't check it in the Hamu is so to live to get the do so that you Lama Chemuris and that some into Yapu Yabu is against Olayan, didn't check it in it. Singing the Tamdanyetala to New Year together. I get along Yabu is against Oyan. Get all the Yabu showed it in the Anti Ramduchimbu is against the order to let the Yukata. This is huge in a Matena Haku Mares on a Chinikan Charas and sauce. Around touch in a matoke and you think you can issue the Hamburgers. Say, I'm sure you get the one Monsieur Perez. Che son che Dubrece with the one Monsieur Per Cendi Dumba. Cendi is a Duma to be a gadget in the Bashaber colors, a dungeon of the color. Cendi Duma to be a gadget, and Cendi Dumas and Kiput and Detab, set up the was on the desert to be gadget in the Basha's that. Cendi Duma to be a gadget in that, future potential of Gitana. The real intention was so capital sheet was she got on the news of Lord. Radically, the Lord she do. Why at that is all that with that this about the Sabamoni, Marishafa Colore, so oh, yes, about color. The Chela, Tripiki, the Burmese, Jidin Chekel, and the Dubacolor, the bus and interest in Jekin and also the bus. Tamaji Druchika, the troops on Yakamata, Cambodian, the Shaka Chamba, Matupi Soba, semi inches in Suya, to the commission when they get Chambas again, and inches in Sobas in the Commons, Yamurete. In a commission of Sumo, there's a cannibal saying that Durutina is a colossal. The Chaka Chambas, the Nitime, Chocolate Chabain, and the Chocolate Camilla Chabain, the teaching Chapigo, the Pinta Chamare, the Chasabu, the Chabas, the Chabaco, Chambarella. Matupi Sobas, the Sobas in the Tibatan, Soba, Lavayo, Marisoso, give a Sava. Rangilla Mahazet, Mangur, something like me. I had it in the Sobas, the president listening also the name of Yagamo, what the Ganyaka Yomocha, Mangur, the Chitam Chavido. May I put it then among the Latina Singate? I asked not to be Sobas. I had in the 70 inches in Kamo, the Yamore, in India Casiti. Ngaranzo senna che ninge pena tasu shaka pa ya woto ngaranzo ya ko ne shaya ko jo shasha ko mi shasha ya ko ai di ta di shyo so to ga ti ne ko shasha di gujo gure sen ti ki tala tu gunguru sen mara ka ta gi shaka di nyam lo gure sen ti de ki ne senna ko ta ma shen khuru ma ka ne shaka re sen ti tu se ninge senni ninge se senna ge ju senna ko do lo ninge de ninge ben to ma da mo ni ko na se ta se to ma ni ta shi shen lo ta ngaranzo ya to lo ko sen the Tonga Tala machine is very nice, Shasha in it. This Tadi Shaka is on the cutting. You can do this in the same ninjas. I don't know. Parties will get as well. I'll do this again. I need to get dear to him to get. I colloq, do your listen, colloq, troop, the it's about Dumba color. So some goes to the Chuki, Romulo, or something, won't take the running or young color, then I'm Campbell down the Turgus.
That's mistaken compassion. So we have, anyway, according to this list, we have on page 274, we have mistaken patience, which we discovered, mistaken patience, mistaken compassion, which is mentioned below and which Kimadazo Rinpoche would explain as just explained, mistaken aspiration and mistaken enjoyment. So a practitioner, especially renunciates and monastics, they should take delight in the taste, so to speak, of study, reflection and meditation. That is what they should enjoy the taste of, right? What they should revel in, what they should relish. Instead of relishing the Dharma, the study, reflection and meditation of the Dharma, if one relishes the worldly enjoyments, well, that is mistaken enjoyment, right? It is said that the sign of genuine study is to be tamed and disciplined. The sign of genuine practice or meditation is to have less emotions. So those are the clear-cut signs of having done fruitful study, to have become tamed and disciplined in one's being, to have done fruitful meditation, or we could say fruitful practice, is to have reduced your emotions. So mistaken compassion, this is explained here as being having compassion for those enduring hardships for the sake of the Dharma. Like if you see practitioners like Milarepa, who are enduring austerities and hardships for the sake of Dharma on the path, and when you see them, you feel so much pity. You think, oh, poor them, that poor practitioner, like those poor 3-year retreatants. They're having such a hard time on retreat. This is completely mistaken compassion, perverse compassion. On the other hand, so you see a practitioner, a lama, staying on 3-year retreat, or you hear about it, and you think, oh, poor them, what a pitiful situation, they must be having such a hard time. You feel sorry for them, and yet you don't feel sorry for worldly people who are creating the causes of suffering. So this is mistaken compassion. The most mistaken of mistaken types of compassion you could have. So practitioners. So practitioners seeking to practice, they have to provide for themselves, they have to build their own retreat huts, seek out their own provisions, go and seek for alms, beg for alms for provisions from local people. And sometimes then, like in Kham, the practitioners, when they go out to seek alms and provisions from households and villages, often they encounter dogs, the guard dogs, and actually face real danger when they bump into these guard dogs. Anyway, I also went out to gather alms and provisions for my study and so on when I was in Kham. I went out once or twice like this. It's such a vast and empty area that you had to go on horseback, otherwise you would never get anywhere. So I went to a local person and requested to borrow his horse. So we borrowed these 2 horses, hired these 2 horses, went with our Dharma friend off to surrounding villages and encampments, and we had these big saddlebags so we could where we could put any butter and sampa that we received. Anyway, people would only give a really little bit, like a handful of this or a scrap of butter, a handful of sampa. We didn't get any real substantial donations. Anyway, then we eventually got to one village, or like an encampment of 3 or 4 houses, and these huge guard dogs came out. These are Tibetan mastiffs, right? Like enormous, ferocious dogs. They came running for us, and I saw my life flash before my eyes. And the horses were fretting and spooking and rearing and anyway, the person I was with, he was looking around as if to plan his escape. So my friend actually, he'd gone off. He'd like cantered off with his horse, like he was going around in circles. And I thought, what is he? Is he like trying to escape and he's going to leave me, or what's he doing? Anyway, because down in this area of Kham, you had these big open vast valleys, but not a stone in sight. There were no stones on the floor. Anyway, he found a yak skull or something. He saw it in the distance. He cantered it, like galloped up to it, picked it up, came galloping back with it, and threw it at the dog. It hit the dog in the head, and then the dogs left us alone. And we managed to get into the village. That was really our saving grace. Otherwise, those dogs were ready to sink their teeth into us and into our horses. Anyway, when we got into the village and we dismounted and we were in the clear, I said, "Oh my God, that was really, really dangerous that we were." I said, "God, what would have happened if those dogs had bitten us?" And even my friend, who was a Kampa, he said, "It's not such a big deal. So what if those dogs bite you? At best, they just take a bit of a small lump of your flesh out." And I thought, that's really true. He says, so what if you get a dog bite or get stabbed? It's not such a big deal. And I thought, it's kind of true. But it shows just those of us who come from India, we really, comparatively speaking, we're real cowards, right? We don't have that kind of the courage of these people in Kham. They are just really fearless, I don't think anything of being attacked by a guard dog or stabbed or having to, get into a fight or what have you. Anyway, this is just all about hardships for the sake of practice. So, there's no need to feel compassion for people who are experiencing hardship for the sake of the Dharma. That is mistaken compassion, not mistaken care, where we fail to introduce our dependents to the Dharma, but help them succeed in this life. So this is important. As a practitioner yourself, you need to encourage others, those close to you, those connected to you, who trust you, who pay heed to you. You need to encourage them in the Dharma. Instead, if you're a Dharma practitioner, but you just encourage your family, so for instance in business, instead of on the path of Dharma, well, you're misleading them, right? That's mistaken care, mistaken rejoicing. To rather than meditate on joy when you see people performing virtue, instead you take delight when our enemies meet with difficulties. When people enjoy good fortune, good luck, success, prosperity, and of course when they engage in virtue, when you see that, you should rejoice, right? Instead of rejoicing when people suffer, when those you don't like end up suffering. So these are the mistaken qualities we must avoid. If we're able to take the lowest seat, there'll be no way for pride and jealousy to creep in. If lamas and monastics fall prey to pride, then they are finished. As is said, on the iron ball of pride, the water of good qualities cannot accumulate. That's how it is. You cannot develop good qualities if you have pride. And you see a lot of people like this. With every 3-year retreat they do, they become more proud. With every certificate they attain, Lupan and Kempo and so on, they become more conceited, more arrogant. They're going in the opposite, in the completely the wrong direction. There'll be no way for qualities to arise. And on the other hand, as long as pride does not arise, obstacles cannot occur. And the moment we start to feel proud, thinking, no one is as good as me, I know much more than them, no one's done as much practice as me, obstacles will occur. So pride is one of the biggest obstacles. In general, don't examine the faults of beings. You should not focus on the faults of others. Recognize they've been your mothers. Recognize their kindness. Meditate on love and compassion for all. Do not look for faults in those who've entered the gateway of the Dharma. So this means that all Buddhist practitioners, all followers of the Buddha, whether they be Geluk, Sakya, Kagyu, Nyingma, followers of any of the Tibetan traditions, or any of the other Buddhist traditions, Cambodia, Burma, and so on and so forth, the foundational vehicle, the Mahayana, any Buddhist tradition in any part of the world, you should not criticize those traditions and those who follow them. Most especially, never look for defects in your teachers. See that everything they do is full of excellent qualities. Make an effort to train in devotion and pure vision. Also, take note of this passage from the following sutra. It's a beautiful story, actually, this. About the greater fault in stealing the possessions of all the beings in a billion worlds and destroying all the stupas there are is criticizing a single bodhisattva. So this is mentioned in this specific sutra requested by Rinpoche. Mentioned the bodhisattva who requested this teaching. So as we spoke about this before, right, with the limitations of our ordinary worldly mind, we cannot tell who is a bodhisattva and who is not. We do not have the ability to say for sure who is a bodhisattva, who is a noble being, who is an ordinary being. The mind of us, the mind of ordinary people, is a limited mind. So we need to acknowledge that and acknowledge that we really do not know who is who. We can talk about, it's important to discern and to analyze, yes, but still the ability of our mind to do so is limited, right? So still we really cannot say for sure who is who. And that being so, then one should not criticize. If you end up criticizing a bodhisattva, well, this is the grave kind of negativity that you are accumulating, because if the object that you criticize, as it says on page 275, in general it's a boundless crime to criticize a sublime being. In this respect, bodhisattvas are particularly dangerous objects, and secret mantra vehicle practitioners even more so. So the weight of your negativity, one factor when it comes to karma is the object of your action, right? So if the object of your criticism, for instance, is a sublime being that is accumulating graver, more negative karma than criticizing an ordinary being. We cannot know who is a sublime being, whether someone is genuinely a genuine practitioner. Said only a fully enlightened Buddha can judge. No one else can do so. We can see in the sutras, we can find accounts of beings suffering, who suffered from the karmic ripening of criticizing a noble being. Like the daughter of a householder who was born crippled and disfigured as the karmic ripening of criticizing Pratika Buddha. It's in the nature of things that by finding faults in others, we ourselves are destroyed. So just as we see in the account of that story, the story I just mentioned, change your attitude, therefore, and examine only your own faults. So actually, there's so much to say about all of these lines, right? All of these points, they're so important. There's stories and anecdotes we could tell to illustrate them all. But that said, we don't have time. We have to get a move on and finish the text. It kind of seems a shame not to have enough time. For beginners, it's not the time to struggle with afflictive emotions, it's time to run away from them. We're not like those who've reached the stage at which they're able to take afflictive emotions on the path. So as ordinary beings, we need to be careful about things like getting angry, so on and so forth. If you've realized it, if say you've attained direct realization, you've gained a real foothold on the, if you've gained a realization, if you're a truly accomplished practitioner, then sure, you can engage in all of these activities and more. In sex, in drink, in taking intoxicants, in lying around, in doing whatever you have, and all of that will be part of the path. Like, look at some of the Mahasiddhas of the past. Like, look at the example of Bodhisattva Shantideva. He would lie around all day in the monastery. He seemed so aimless and lousy that all the other monks started to criticize him. But then he displayed his realization by levitating into space and giving profound teachings, and everyone was roused to great faith and amazed to see his inner accomplishments. And other Mahasiddhas who seemed to laze around and drink and enjoy women and do all sorts of things. But they were realized beings, right? They were not ordinary beings. So when the scriptures speak of being able to take the afflictions as the path, they're referring to someone like these accomplished Indians and Tibetans of the past, Shantideva and the other great Mahasiddhas of Tibet and India, who inwardly have truly reached the ultimate level of wisdom and outwardly can display miraculous powers. They're not talking about someone who has no control of their mind and is in fact recklessly indulging in afflictions. It's extremely important not to misinterpret this point. This is like raw, red, profound advice from the very heart of Kyabje Dushin Rinpoche. So important for practitioners. This paragraph, maybe we should just print out this paragraph and make posters of it or something. We could actually teach for like 2 or 3 days around this paragraph, right? If you happen to come by things like food, clothes and money, instead of pretending you don't need them, accept them and use them as much as you do need to help you to practice, and give away whatever's left to fields such as the teacher and the 3 jewels. So this is for monastics and renunciants, lamas and so on, who might be offered donations and so on. No need to artificially say, oh, I don't need this, or I can't accept, what have you. You can accept it, but then use it wisely, right? So if you do not have such things, rather than making a lot of effort to seek them, make do with what you have. Look, what is Dushin Rinpoche saying here? He says, rather than making a lot of effort to seek wealth, invest in business and so on, make do with what you have. This is written almost a century ago, before this whole issue of lamas building hotels and restaurants and so on to raise money for their monasteries and what have you, or going over to Taiwan and being busy overseas raising funds. But Kyabje Dushin Rinpoche has preempted all of that. Well, not preempted it, but his advice is, what he says here is very sharp, pointed advice. And criticism or warning against doing such things. He's saying that is not the way a practitioner should be. If you receive offerings without having to strive for them, then you can accept them and make skillful use of them, right, in accord with the Dharma. But if you don't actually receive offerings, then don't go out of your way to seek them. Make do with what you have. Buddha attested that, Buddha promised that his followers, his genuine followers, would never go hungry. Those who followed him and trained on the path would never go hungry. They would always at least have enough to eat. He said even if they're living in a land struck by famine, they will still survive. It's said that anyone who practices the Dharma in sincerity will have what he or she needs to live on, provided by celestial beings. So as we just said, so you do not need to and should not turn away from your practice and turn your efforts instead to fundraising and seeking money and so on and so forth. Just make do with what you have. Unless you can be content and not want more than you have, being called a Dharma practitioner will in fact be a hollow deceit. Constantly postponing things and remaining indifferent are enormous obstacles to any kind of practice. If you think, well, so don't think, oh, I'll do 3-year retreat, I'll start my 3-year retreat this year, or I'll start a retreat this year, and then you postpone it because something else comes up, and you think, oh, I'll just do this and that first, and then I'll do my retreat next year and next year. If you start postponing like this, the years will just go by. There'll always be something to delay you, something to postpone you. And you see a lot of practitioners like this, people who pledge to do a 3-year retreat, and then they say, well, first of all, I'll build a nice cabin for myself. Building the cabin takes a few years. Then there's something else for them to do. So they delay. And the years go by. As a practitioner up in Ola, practitioners who kept postponing their retreat like this, one excuse after the other, saying, it was either his children or it was either his farming or his livestock, what have you. There was always some excuse, some reason why he had to postpone his retreat. Eventually I just spoke to him very directly. I said, if you can't give up your concerns for these mundane things, how are you ever going to stay on retreat? You just have to cut your ties and go. And then he took it to heart and went off to retreat. And in the second year of his retreat, I went to see him, and he said, Rinpoche, what you said was really true. I regret it so much. I postponed my practice, and I'm old, and I'm doing here on retreat, so that's good, but my eyes don't see well, my knees hurt. It's really difficult. I struggle to read the text. We don't have electricity up there, or we didn't at this time. So his eyes were too poor to read the text, read his practice text, even in candlelight. His body was in pain because his knees were poor and so on. He said, if I just actually practiced when I originally intended to, it would have been so much better. Like Rizal Rinpoche also always used to say, the time for accomplishing Dharma and also the time for accomplishing worldly things is when you're young. So if you're a worldly person, the time to do things is when you're young. If you're a practitioner, the time to practice is when you're young. If you wait till you're late, till you're old, it's too late. You're too weak and frail physically and mentally. The time has passed. Or the prime time has passed. So you need to make use of your time and not postpone. If you make a lot of long-term plans, you'll never incorporate the Dharma in yourself. So curtail your plans more and more. Don't depend on dry intellectual understanding of emptiness. Don't depend on coarse behavior and crazy deeds in the name of the practice. This might fool a few people with impure deeds into thinking you're an accomplished being, like displaying some kind of limited clairvoyance or reading other people's minds or some kind of crazy wisdom acts. People might then be very impressed and think, wow, this Lama is so amazing. But actually, such actions are just destroying yourself and others. Better just to stay alone, quietly, out of the limelight, and practice and recite the Vajraguru mantra. Instead of pretend you're so knowledgeable to attempt to teach others, you're not helping others, you're not helping yourself, and you end up nowhere. So, the scriptures say that an individual who has no real experience of realization whatsoever can't benefit beings even if he tries, right? That's what I was just saying. And he'll harm themselves beside. Therefore, it's more productive simply to be diligent in one's own practice. To take yourself off and just practice quietly and sincerely, as if one were protecting the sapling of a valuable medicinal tree from being cut. Someone who has attained the stage of warmth on the path of joining, but has not achieved stability, might benefit others, but he'll damage himself. Once one's attained the bodhisattva levels, though, one is able to benefit both oneself and other beings effortlessly. In short, keeping your mind in tune with the Dharma, never displease the deities or your teachers. Be diligent in the methods for spontaneously accomplish the twofold goal. This completes a brief explanation of the stages of the special preliminaries, and sow the seeds of the extraordinary profound path in 5 sections. 5 sections meaning refuge, bodhicitta, vajrasattva, manjula offering, and guru yoga, these 5. So we've completed the explanation proper of these 5 preliminary practices. So we've actually finished the main body, we've concluded the main body of the text. What follows is some concluding paragraphs reflecting on the kindness of the teacher and teachings. Explaining and listening to these profound teachings is the occasion for both teacher and disciples to think of kindness, and so on. Reflect on the fact that by having the Dharma to practice, we can make our human life meaningful. How exceedingly kind all of these figures are. Buddhas, our teachers, the Dharma, our spiritual brothers and sisters, and our parents. All these conditions occur because of kindness, so make a wish that the precious teachings may continue to endure for a long time. Finally, recognize that the teacher, explaining the Dharma, the listeners, and the explanation itself are all void of intrinsic existence. They are like a magic illusion. So, in short, Jujun Rinpoche is saying we must infuse this act of listening to and explaining and listening to this teaching with the 3 excellences: preparation, main part, and conclusion. We must conclude it with dedication, dedicating all of the virtue through listening to and explaining this teaching to the enlightenment of all beings. The merit of all of those who come from far away here to listen to the teachings. The merit of all the sponsors and patrons who've made this event possible. The presence of all the monastics and lamas here. Must dedicate this great wealth of virtue to enlightenment and make aspiration prayers from the depths of our hearts that the teachings may spread, the teachings may flourish, and the teachers may live long and turn the wheel of the Dharma again and again. So at the end of today's session we will recite some extra aspiration prayers, the King of Aspiration Prayer, and so on. In dedication and aspiration, the benefits of explaining and listening to the Sublime Dharma are inconceivable. They are literally inconceivable. They surpass thought, surpass measure. To this end, Buddha said, the generosity of filling universes countless as the grains of sand by the Ganges with gold and so on is nothing compared to the benefit of expanding a single verse in an evil age. Compared to literally filling the entire world with gold and beautiful gifts of gems and valuable things and offering these up to the Buddhas. The merit of, in comparison, the merit of the teaching just a single verse of Dharma is of greater merit. That said, it's a greater benefit if the verse is taught sincerely and it actually touches the heart of the listener and brings about some transformation. So when the teacher teaches and students listen, some transformation should be taking place on both sides. Should be transforming the mind of the teacher and also the mind of the students. Something should be happening. Otherwise, if your stream of being is not transformed, then nothing special is happening really. Right? The point of teaching, and the point of listening to the teachings is to transform one's being. Simply by hearing the names of the deities, of the secret mantras and so on, all obscurations are exhausted. So what's being said is, if even just reciting the names of the Buddhas and so on, names of the Buddhas, so that beings hear that, if even that brings such great benefit, it goes without saying that explaining the Dharma, explaining the meaning of the Dharma, brings extraordinary benefit. By teaching the Dharma with a clear mind, free of personal aims, free of selfish concerns, worldly concerns, and from the student's side, to listen sincerely, with appreciation and a sincere intention, not with greed, the wish to just gain a teaching for one's personal benefit, like a hunter seeking musk from a deer. From this, by teaching in this way, one will acquire memory, concentration, and so on, and will hold the treasury of the Dharma, receive teachings from the Buddhas, be praised and venerated by hosts of gods and humans. Hold the treasury of the Dharma, what we can think of almost like the late Dojo Rinpoche, Dogen Rinpoche, Penno Rinpoche, and so on. Present day, His Holiness the Dalai Lama. These are the great holders of the treasury of the Dharma. One will fulfill all their wishes for virtue and excellence, and so on. We could really tell a story, a story from the life of the great masters of the past, to illustrate each of these points. That would, then we'd need to be here for 2 or 3 more days. One will fulfill all their wishes for virtue and excellence. In all one's lives, one will remain inseparable from the sublime Dharma, and so on. Fortunate disciple, when one has listened, one will gain knowledge. With knowledge, the afflictions will be pacified. When the afflictions are pacified, demons will be unable to harm one. From listening to the Dharma, faith takes birth. If you don't listen to the Dharma, then faith will not arise. So you need to listen to the Dharma, learn about the qualities of the 3 jewels and so on, karmic cause and effect, and then faith will arise. Through faith, one aspires to the 6 perfections and swiftly attains Buddhahood. So listening, meaning studying the Dharma, is so important. It doesn't mean, we're not talking just about the scriptural study of renunciants, monastics, Kimbo's, Lupins. Whoever you are, whatever practice you're doing, for instance, if you're a lay student practicing the Mani mantra or the Vajraguru mantra, well then you need to study, you need to receive teachings connected to that, right? You need to learn, you need to listen to the Dharma that's relevant to your practice. So what does the Mani mantra mean? What does the Vajraguru mantra mean? How to recite that? How to visualize? How to dedicate? What are the vital points of visualization? The 4 states that bind the life force and so on. If you're going on retreat, well, how to stay on retreat? How do you set the boundary? Right? And so on and so forth. Otherwise you end up with people going on retreat. They don't actually know how to. They end up seeing their, friends and family throughout their retreat, which is not as it should be. There's so much value to study, to educating oneself in the Dharma. Those who have studied this have done formal study of the scriptures for several years. The knowledge they gain serves them throughout their life, no matter what they do. If they want to study some other subject, then they have the kind of knowledge and foundation to do that. They can they have an understanding and knowledge that makes other subjects and further study accessible. Whether it be going on retreat or doing practice or whatever type of practice, all of those, the study just opens the door to all of these things. It means that you're someone who's done a few years of study, formal study. They'll know how to stay on retreat properly, how to engage in practice, and so on and so forth. You just really can't be compared. Someone who's done a few years of formal study and gained some knowledge, they just can't be compared. There's no comparison then with someone who hasn't done, a practitioner who hasn't done any formal study. That said, of course, you can do formal study and become knowledgeable, but kind of your mind get poisoned along the way. You can become proud and conceitful and lose your faith in the teachings and end up criticizing the teachings, becoming a real skeptic and so on. There are people like this, better than, there's nothing good about that. But those are the rare and very negative exception. But generally speaking, we can say that there is so much virtue and importance to study. For monastics, renunciants, it's really, really important and valuable to engage in at least some formal study of the scriptures. As cannot convey the importance and value of that. Quoted some lines by Sakya Pandita. And then as Ngondro Rinpoche used to say, Jamgon Khondro Datai, he lived until his Rinpoche's 70s or his 90s. Sorry, I missed it. But anyway, he lived very long, and there was no contemporary masters who equaled Jamgon Khondro in his knowledge. He was so incredibly knowledgeable. It said that even in his latest years, he was still an ardent reader and scholar. He was still reading scriptures and studying. Even one of his last years, he was still reading new texts, still learning. And he read a page of Sakya Pandita's writings. These lines Rinpoche quoted. So Jamgon Khondro lived into his 90s, and even his 90s, he was still learning, still studying, still expanding his knowledge. And one time in his 90s, he was reading a text by Sakya Pandita, came across some lines of teaching, and he said aloud, "My goodness, only today have I come to understand this point, this important point from the teachings of Sakya Pandita." And the point is that we should not ever feel, even if you're a Khenpo or Lobön or what have you, your studies are never over. We must keep on learning, expanding our knowledge, keep on studying throughout our lives. This is so important and valuable. Now at the bottom of page 278, the signal that the sacred teaching will begin, the beating of the drum or wooden gong, will bring enlightenment to those who hear. So what need mention they who come to listen here? Listen there. So even the sound, blowing the conch, which is the sign, which is traditionally how one calls people to the teaching. Conch is blown to announce that the teaching is about to be given, and this calls people to the teaching like a bell. It said that sound itself is so much blessings that it will lead beings liberation and enlightenment. We used to blow the conch here, but it seems we're not doing that anymore. People worry that everyone's going to get liberated and enlightened, or maybe the conch broke, or what happened, I don't know. Anyway, in our monastery we chant that we blow the conch 3 times. Everyone must be gathered by the last blow. Short story. Well, I'll tell the story very kind of concisely. Khenpo Rinpoche was with his guru, Pudru Rinpoche. Pudru Rinpoche was heading, I think, to central Tibet. Khenpo Rinpoche wanted to come to accompany him, but Pudru Rinpoche said, "No need to accompany me, you've received everything, and bad times are coming, so you should not travel much." He said, "Don't travel around much." He said, "These are dark times. it's unlikely, it's rare to find students to teach to find students who will want to study and learn from you. But if people do request you for teachings, then you must teach. You must teach and teach and teach. He gave that command to his disciple. And so Khenpo Rinpoche, that is how he passed his life. In actual fact, from his own side, he was not interested in teaching. He always loved to stay in retreat, in solitude. That was his character, that's how he was. He liked to live in solitude, in retreat, and just to spend his time practice. Sorry, now we're talking about Khenpo Rinpoche, also a disciple of Pojo Rinpoche. Anyway, so we're talking about, so we're looking at this first paragraph on page 279. Realizing that it's extremely difficult to meet with the teachings and that to do so has immense benefit. One should be diligent in using whatever means they can to teach the Dharma and listen to it. So in connection with this, I told this short anecdote about Khenpo Rinpoche. His Guru Pojo Rinpoche told him, if you are requested to teach, if there are people who want to learn from you, you must teach and teach and teach. And so he spent decades of his life teaching every day without a single break. Khenpo Rinpoche was no different in that. And all the rest of their time these two masters spent in retreat, and many years of retreat actually, many years of retreat if you add it all together. As the following quotations say, it's so rare to encounter rebirth in a human body with contact with the Dharma in a realm where the Buddha has come. This is such a rare and just inconceivably, inexpressibly rare and precious opportunity. So we must make use of it by practicing. And those who go off to practice and stay in retreat, say in 3-year retreat, then one word of advice to you, please, in your session breaks, it's so important to read teachings like the words of my perfect teacher and the instructions from the great masters. Best is if you can receive teachings on those texts in person from your teachers, but these days at least there are lots of recordings one can listen to. So as Longchenpa says, when we first enter the doctrine we need to listen and so on. It's so important to listen. So even when you're on retreat, in your sessions, in your breaks between sessions, listen to these important teachings. Even when our minds are liberated, we need to listen, because it stops the proliferation of doubts while we are practicing, right? While we're practicing a 3-year retreat, say, we also need to listen, because when our virtuous activities stagnate, it helps us progress. Okay, so these lines are the words of the great omniscient one, Longchenpa. At present, from the moment we first set out on the path until we reach the end of it, till we complete the path, listening is important in providing something to look up to, because it turns our minds towards what the masters of the past practiced and increases our own experiences and realization.
Loka chokpa tang rangi nyamto kondu chara yupi keshir tang tangbun di chokche kang yang rungwa shigla shene wambra drubyang ta michulwe ta michulwe se michulwa se michulwa ta tonda chikpare ta michulwe se ta.
So reading through the last paragraph on page 279. We may appear to be practicing the Dharma, but we won't make any progress at all if we're not careful as explained above, to quote from the Sutra of the Arborescent Array, fortunate disciple, if you wish to attain Buddhahood, you must train in seeking to reach the other shore of the ocean of learning. In order to take the broad highway to liberation yourself, to ensure that the teachings endure for ages, and to bring beings to the glory and excellence of benefit and happiness, devote yourself to explaining and practicing this path, and spread the activities of the universally good Pammakara, meaning Guru Rinpoche, to fill the whole of space. These now we have the afterword and colophon, which are beautifully written and very poetic. So all of these closing sections are so beautiful and of course contain so much meaning. There's a lot we could say about them, but for lack of time, we're just having to move through these closing sections quite fast. So now we come to the afterword. For every single one of the traditions of the profound and vast Dharma, the text of the preliminary practice, these preliminary practices, the Ngondro, is the basic starting point, so pay heed to this. The essence of the instructions, the greatest of wishing jewels. Why would those with faith and fortune not use it as a crown? This is the way 10 million accomplished knowledge holders have taken. There's no imagining a path more excellent than this. So if you practice it properly with diligence, it's certain you will seize the great goal, the supreme everlasting state. Though not known as preliminary, it's the ultimate main practice, sufficient in itself, the main pillar of the path. Without it, babbling on about profound advanced practices like generation and perfection, the yogic practices and so on and so forth, that is just like transferring consciousness into a headless corpse. Like teachings you might have heard, but if they are not practiced, many teachings you might have heard, but if they're not practiced, like the kimba fruit, they'll not release you when you are in need. Kimba fruit is actually poisonous. You can eat it, and for a moment it might taste good and fill your stomach, but in the long term effect is that it's going to poison and kill you. So, if you do not put the teachings into practice, and if you do not practice the preliminaries, the Dharma, the teachings you've received will not release you. They will not liberate you when you are in need. You've relied on a mere understanding of the sublime Dharma. Alas, friends, who has robbed you of your intelligence? Bearing aloft the lamp of the sacred path instructions, do not fall asleep on the bed of indolence, but banish the darkness of existence with its hundreds of faults. Now is the time to kindle the light of the twofold goal. This is an entreatment for all of us to apply ourselves to practice these fivefold preliminaries, to not just laze around and not while away our time. Those of you we should practice the preliminaries, we should fill the commitments we've made. Those of you who've committed to practice the Guru mantra, the money mantra, and retreat or what have you, we need to apply ourselves, not fall prey to laziness. So this is an encouragement, an incitement. For you who do not make an effort to be diligent at once, that arch enemy, the Lord of Death, is here with mouth agape, his fickle tongue swifter than the dance of lightning, impatient in his haste to snatch away a person's life. In a perfectly arrayed mansion of massive rocky mountains, Master like Kyabje Jushin Rinpoche is both perfectly realized and extraordinarily learned, great scholar, composer, writer. These lines, these closing verses are so beautiful and poetic, so evocative. So, with very poetic language, Jushin Rinpoche is saying, is entreating us to take ourselves to isolated places enchanting isolated places, rocky mountains, delightful valleys, lonely forests, and not just enjoy those places, the beauty in nature, but savor the nectar of concentration there. I urge you, take yourself to such places and seize the citadel of immortality and great bliss. The Kathmandu Valley is a very blessed place, without a doubt. It's a very blessed place full of sacred sites, but it's so overcrowded now, so built up and busy and noisy, that I'm not sure that would qualify really as an ideal practice place of solitude. Not like our remote areas up in the Himalayas and border regions. To clearly indicate the right path for achieving that, I've used the instructions of the lineage teachers that well explain the stages of the preliminary practice and condense the essential points of the profound meaning, arranging them in a way that's easy to understand. And Jujun Rinpoche has done exactly this, gathered all of the most essential, profound points in a pithy and accessible way, rooted in the words of my perfect teacher and the other instructions of the great masters, and explained the profound and crucial points of the practice in a way that is clear and easy to understand. Clear, profound, unmistaken, following the words and tradition of the great masters. I may not be so bright, but I'm unstained by inferior motives and unsullied by any intellectual ambition, and so my sole wholehearted wish to benefit others, I think I have nothing to regret at having expressed this with a pure altruistic heart. I have not done this, he's saying, out of the 8 worldly concerns, for name, fame, gain, but merely with a pure intention, the pure wish to benefit others, with a pure intention, right? This is an important word, pure intention. Tibetans use this word very casually. They say, have pure intention, do it with pure intention, but it seems few Tibetans know what this really means. Pure intention means to do something motivated solely by the wish to benefit others. It's a purely altruistic, benevolent heart, free of even a drop of personal interest. As it says here, pure altruistic heart. Nevertheless, for everything incorrectly explained, I am to blame, and I will pray it will not lead to harsh retribution. So here, Khetri Dujun Rinpoche is demonstrating humility, making a gesture of humility. The parts that have been explained properly are so thanks to the kindness of my teacher. So he's saying, although I have composed this with pure intention, it's possible I have made mistakes. If I have made any mistakes, I confess them. I own them and I confess them. By the merit obtained through these efforts, may all beings have the great... So this is just a gesture of humility, right? A noble gesture of humility. Bless me that what I've written is able to fulfill the Sublime One's aspirations. By the merit I've obtained through these efforts, the effort of composing this text, may all beings have the great good fortune to hear, reflect and meditate on this tradition of the Supreme Vehicle. Every day of this teachings, up until today, people have made mandala offerings, very elaborate, kind of majestic mandala offerings at the beginning of each test session, accompanied by very handsome, eloquent mandala expositions. These speeches that the lamas stand up and read aloud, written on scrolls. They read aloud. But does really much benefit come from all of these displays of eloquence and learning and wealth and generosity. It's a display involving a lot of pomp and circumstance. So who knows if those such mandala offerings done in public, sort of public display of offering and this and that is really actually serving a purpose. It's questionable. What does definitely serve a purpose? Hearing, reflecting and meditating. Applying ourselves to practice sincerely. These are definitely actions with purpose, with benefit that will come to fruit. So I too, without any selfless considerations, have committed myself as the guide of infinite beings. And may I too be the equal of Bodhisattva Samantabhadra with the victory banner of study and practice. So these are the activities that will be of real benefit, right? As opposed to just public shows of pomp and circumstance and so on. With this victory banner crowned by that marvelous wishing jewel, the oral tradition of the profound secret, yielding a constant fine vein of the two accomplishments and everything desired, may the three worlds be filled with fortune, benefit and happiness. So with these beautiful lines of dedication and aspiration, Dushan Rinpoche concludes his text. Now we come to the colophon. It's easy to apply commentary. It was initially requested by my principal diamond disciple, the main principal disciple, one of the principal disciples of Dushan Rinpoche, great Lama in his own right. Togo Jigme Chi Norba Dun Tamshi Drubede. With words of devotion, he presented an immaculate white silken ceremonial scarf and the precious mandala marked with auspicious signs. This just goes to show it is so valuable to make requests of the teachers, to entreat the teachers to compose texts, to give teachings. If it weren't for the requests of this disciple and also the practitioner Trushit Dorje, we would not have this text. We would not have this text in our hands. We would not have this treasury of Dharma, this source of benefit. We have Sakya Gongma, right? The great master Sakya Gongma. Now, when we say he's an incarnation of Turton, I think she said Abang Turton, is a great treasure of Vila. We say he's the incarnation. He's recognized by some as the incarnation of this treasure of Vila and an emanation of Guru Rinpoche himself. So it seems some Sakya followers, when you say this, one would say this as a extraordinary praise of Sakya Gongma, right? Who is greater than Guru Rinpoche? To say a master is an emanation or equal to Guru Rinpoche, that's like the highest praise you could give. But anyway, Trushit Dorje was disciple of Dushan Rinpoche, a student of Abang Turton, and that's where the talk about Sakya Gongma Rinpoche came from. That's the connection. Trushit Dorje was a student of Abang Turton and also then a student later of Dushan Rinpoche. And Tushik Dorje, his Sangyong, he had an extraordinary. I think Rinpoche said Tushik Dorje is Rinpoche's consort. So Tushik Dorje was a heart disciple of Jushin Rinpoche, and this other Terjen, who was a great master in himself and an important figure in the Dujum tradition. His consort was a great Dakini, and Tushik Dorje, at the end of his life, I think Rinpoche said, offered his consort and his wealth and everything he had to Dorje Rinpoche. Dorje Rinpoche accepted. And okay, moving on. So it was at the request of these two lamas and heart disciples that Jushin Rinpoche wrote this text. He says, I took as the basis the oral instructions of the Noble Pervading Lord, my sublime teacher, and clarified them using suitable sections and so on. So this text is just like Patrul Rinpoche's The Words of My Perfect Teacher. It's rooted in Longchenpa's trilogy of Resting the Mind and the teachings of Longchenpa on the auspicious date of the Buddha's descent from the God realms. Okay, so to backtrack, in reply to these and other requests from numerous interested and intelligent disciples, I, Jidal Yeshe Doje, Gelek Nampalo Gyalwede, Jidal means fearless. This is part of Jushin Rinpoche's name. As is the Tibetan tradition, Jushin Rinpoche, when asked to name children, he would often give them the name Jigme, which means fearless. Jigdal also means fearless. This is a common tradition, Tibetan tradition. Like His Holiness the Dalai Lama, his name is Tenzin Gyatso, right? So these days there are hundreds of Tibetan children whose names begin with Tenzin. You can immediately tell, oh right, His Holiness they gave him their name. When I asked to give names to children, I try and give them all different names, you know. So I try and give people like individual distinct names, so at least then we can tell who's who, you know. Otherwise if you end up with dozens of people with the same name, life can get very confusing, you know. That said, it's not to say that the tradition of lamas giving their own name to those they name is meaningless. The names lamas give children holds a great kind of auspicious significance, right? They're like aspirations. Anyway, but so it's not without meaning, but aside from that, to give everyone the same name, you know, so that you end up with whole generations of children with the same name, it's not much point or benefit, not much point in that. Anyway, this was just about names. So I, a tantric practitioner of royal descent who can claim to be a follower of the long tradition of the great master of Odhyana, took as basis the oral instructions of the Noble All-Pervading Lord and so on. I've always had very auspicious connection, it seems, with this text when teaching this text. The first time I taught this text up in Humna. So Dujin Rinpoche says, on the auspicious date of the Buddha's descent from the God realms, Lava Duchen. I composed this text, and the first time I taught this text up in Humla, just by coincidence, I started the teaching on Lama Buduchen on this same day. The same day that Drushan Rinpoche finished his composition. So there have always been kind of very auspicious coincidences when teaching this text, which is a really wonderful thing. Now we have these closing verses. Swasti of all the paths so wondrous and profound, this is the distilled essence and so on. So reading through these lines and the few lines on page 284. Sarva da kalyanam bhavato. Now we finish the entire text. So following the tradition, already I should now close the teaching with a lot of dedications. The dedications for one's own benefit, for the benefit of others, for both benefit of self and others. But we are out of time, so we will make some concise dedications, sincere but concise dedications for the benefit of the spread, the flourishing of the teachings in general, specifically the teachings of Drushan Rinpoche, the Drushan Tersa tradition, and most especially the Nampa Kyungson tradition, for the teachings of the secret mantra teachings of the Nyingma, and for the teachings as a whole, the long life and flourishing of all of the genuine teachers and lineage upholders, the flourishing of prosperity in Tibet and surrounding areas, the long life of His Holiness the Dalai Lama and all great teachers. So to these and other wonderful ends, auspicious ends, we will now dedicate the merit and make aspiration prayers.